Well, thank you for joining me here today, Mehrshad. Quick rundown as to how I know him. I'm actually a realtor. That's what I do full time. And I helped Mehrshad and his wife purchase their very first home together. It was a fantastic time, and I got to know them quite well. And throughout that process, I learned that they were actually, well, Mehrshad specifically was from Iran originally and eventually moved to Canada. And we started to talk about the Bible, all kinds of interesting subjects. And as things transpired in Iran over the last, first of all, actually, I'll say I probably will say Iran once or twice. I don't mean to offend Mehrshad. I'm
No,
trying
no.
my best. Iran. A lot of people have been asking questions, and there is, in my opinion, an epic fog of war over the conflict in the Middle East right now, and people are scrambling to figure out what's actually going on. So I appreciate you coming on here today and giving myself and my listeners your perspective as a believer, but also someone who grew up in Iran. I don't want to give out too many of your of the topics that we're going to get in here today. But is there anything you want to add to your introduction? You want to give yourself an introduction of any kind, or?
No, this was kind of well put together, kind of a gist of kind of where I come from and how we met. Yeah, and
Mm,
the rest can actually slowly come up throughout conversation. But yeah,
sure. Okay, perfect. Well, as I mentioned, you're originally from Iran. So I in the West here, and specifically in Canada where we live, you're given a picture of what life is like in the Middle East in general. And I think that for my generation, for the millennials, a lot of that is mud huts and sand everywhere and desert and things that we learned and were programmed to believe en masse during the Afghanistan and Iraq conflict after 9/11. But in the little bit of research that I have been doing about Iran since the conflict really took off, that's not really the picture at all. So, what was it actually like growing up in Iran? And can you even describe what the country's like?
yeah, absolutely. So, um, I would say yeah. So that's a very good depiction of people's assumptions. In fact, myself, I'm most of my encounter with my friends and my circle oftentimes reveals that kind of a general mindset about what Iran is like and how life is like there. But that is generally further from the reality of the life that is there. So Iran itself is obviously, as the name would portray it for you, goes back originally to the Persian Empire. And originally in the Anglosphere and the Latin world, it was called Persian Empire. So a very public commentary that I've recently heard is also Iranians are reintroducing themselves as Persians. That's actually not the case. We've self-identify and understand as Persian, but recently it's basically just like the word Chinese. Like Chinese people say, I'm from China, but in Chinese language, they have a different term for it. And so we Iranians had a different term in Farsi for our country and a region, Iran, which in linguistically translates to descriptive form of the plateau, the land that is there in the Middle East, starting from the Euphrates going towards Pakistan. But anyhow, the country is obviously composed of the remnant of the Persian Empire. It's actually one of the quote unquote most organic political units in the entire not even just in Middle East, but the entire global community. It's traced back in its linguistic traditions, heritage, food, culture. And it's not uniform. It's not one Persian or one Iranian identity. There is a minimum of 40 different ethnic, so to speak, or like a community of identity within Iran, on top of
Hmm.
many other smaller tribes and sects that live even a smaller village-like communities inside Iran. Over the 20th century, that has dissolved into cosmopolitan identity of one nation, one identity. At the erosion of these ethnicities, so my ethnicity would come from northern Iran or Yazdi and Mashhadi, but that would be 200-300 years ago, just remnant of the my family name would kind of signify that. So that's just a quick gist of just like kind of the country's history. It has gone through significant change, significant cultural changes, and still continuity. Two major point of breaking point is the Alexandrian conquest that was profoundly transformative in the antiquity, Mongolian conquest, and the Islamic conquest. Islamic conquest was the most religiously profound transformation, just the ripping of the entire social fabric and social values. Um, it introduced a significant portion of the what's called a Abrahamic um, code into the Iranian or the Persian society. Some for good, some for bad. For sure, some for bad. As we can later on discuss it with the Islamic theology and the influence it has in some areas of life in terms of its negative contribution. So yeah, so that's going back to 600 BC and 600 AD. Um, and the country remained Islamic until about 1850s. It started to rapidly shift to Shiism. So Sunnism is a predominant sect, like
Hmm.
Catholicism, predominant sect right up to the about 1800. Then Shiism arise, and one of the reasons that Shiism becomes the centered identity of Iran was that Iran, contrary to the rest of the Arab world, had this Persian tension in terms of identity, language, and history with the rest of the Arab world, and was not necessarily subjecting itself to the caliphate of the medieval times. And the caliphate rulers of Persia were looking for an identity that would be able to empower them to push back the Sunni dominant or Catholicism of Islam, so to speak. And
Mm.
so they find Shiism imported to Iran, and the rest is history. Iran is a Shia. So now, fast forward my personal life growing up in Iran. Yeah, so our country had a revolution, Islamic Revolution, 1979.
Mm.
Um, it is arguably the third most detrimental events of the 20th, third or fourth, I'd say, after the rise of the Nazis, then the rise of the Marxists in China and Russia, the Islamic revolutionaries in Iran um, ripped apart the entire social fabric in Iran. Millions escaped the country. Um, they engaged in so very justly, I kind of associating it with my life testimony as we are kind of going through this interview.
Yeah.
Iran was a very open society, aside of its political freedoms that were very limited. We had a lot of social freedom. So Iranian Jews were the second largest Jewish population in the entire Middle East. My mom
Hmm.
and my grandparents recall growing up with a lot of Jewish friends. They were invited to a lot of synagogue festivities, and reversely, the Jewish family friends would be invited back to the Muslim Eids in Tehran. In my family, at least, but many other families in our social circle experienced that. So was the case with Armenian Christians, and so very cosmopolitan. Oh, sorry, you here? I hear
So I
you
was
have
going
a
to
question.
ask. So there, the animosity of that time for your parents, the religious animosity was not really much of a an issue compared to now.
Almost it's just non-existing.
Mm.
I don't want to exaggerate it. There's definitely a, classical forms of social tension. I don't want to paint a broad paint over this. Like, I don't want to create a Eden out of the past of any kind of country, including
Yeah, for
Poland.
sure. Yeah.
But the extent to which right now the absolute destruction of all Jews is sought after by the state of Iran is
Hmm.
nothing that most of the civic fabric ever demanded or was even pursuing. Um, to even bluntly put it for you, after this First World War, the Armenian Christian population of Ottoman Empire was going through a genocide, a famous genocide that
Yeah.
was happening in Ottoman Empire. Very famous,
Yeah.
recorded prior even to Holocaust. About approximately 800,000 to 2 million Christians were wiped out by the by the Ottoman Turk
Ottoman. Yeah.
forces. Well, guess what? Which country they fled to? Persia, and they received supplies. residency, protection, and there is ever expanding research in how much theological domain of protection was extended by theologians, like Islamic theologians, to the lives of Armenian Christians. That's why actually we have millions of Armenian Christians in Iran. And so Iran's social fabric was more or less can be said to have more of a stabilized social harmony without the rejection. Obviously, there's micro levels of conflict and tension and social violence that would be there, but generally, the
Hmm.
fact that these minorities were able to live was the kind of a sign that the society that you see today, the government, the politics that you see today, was almost non-existent. To um, those social values were right around us in social circle when I was growing up. Going back to your original question, how was it growing up?
Hmm.
Um, Contrary to the extreme pressures of government to brainwash the public for extreme hatred towards the Jewish people, number one, or
Hmm.
the state of Israel, but number two, generally towards Westerners. Them that's precisely also why there is a robust social pushback against the government. So that was my upbringing. I grew up in social circles where tension never existed. My mom encouraged us to
Hmm.
go. We had civic studies actually that's encouraged it to a great extent to actually learn about Judaism and Christianity.
Hmm.
Obviously, we were taught not to convert; it's punishable by law. But we were also taught to understand it, and especially Armenian Christians and the Jewish sects that live in Iran. And the social fabric is very much open to it. It's not hostile. It's not derogatory. To this minute, as the conflict goes, and recently, just about a couple of days ago, the synagogue, the famous old synagogue of Tehran, was destroyed in conflict. But
Yeah.
that synagogue was a heritage of standing on its feet without any kind of attacks or anything internally.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that was my upbringing in terms of social value. Families in Iran are very important. Extended families with extensive amount of kids and uncles, and that's one thing that is from having now lived to the age of 34 and done a lot of political theory and social sciences. I kind of have a good kind of grasp of what the difference and differentiation and some of the positives that Islam has unintentionally contributed to some of the Islamic nations is maintenance of the family structure. It's not across the board in different nations. The nations that are prone to polygamous practices are experience way more social tension. Iran faced that polygamy about early 1900, and it became a social taboo to the point that when I was growing up, any man who ever had a polygamous relationship either had to hide it completely, otherwise they would get socially ostracized.
Hmm.
Almost in a form of social cancel culture. They would be ostracized in terms of trade. Grocery stores wouldn't sell them food. Realtors wouldn't work with them because they identified it as an exploitation of a fellow sister. So social bonds is very close. So that had evolved around 1900 due to, we don't need to get into it, but um, very slowly that kind of norm, even though it stands contrary to Islam, it had evolved in Iran. Same thing in Turkey. Turkey had gone through that evolution. So we didn't grow up necessarily, even though the government put a lot of pressure on Islamicizing society, especially after the revolution. There was a lot of exposure to the global community. And I would even add that a tiny bit even more intense of an interaction with the global community right after 9/11,
Hmm. Of
because
course.
the 9/11 created a social shock for a lot of ordinary, quote unquote, normies of like normal people who are trying to live their lives.
Yeah.
And they were like, this is like, if radicals who are hidden in caves in Afghanistan or like in Iraq can bring about such a ruthless havoc that
Hmm.
matches the level of atrocities of the Second World War, this is like this is not even like, so it immediately became entirely rejected, not the terrorism itself, but
Yeah.
just the idea of extreme zealousy can bring such
Yeah.
havoc and then
Yeah.
pits people and nations against one another. So there was a massive push. I remember even growing up, I think I was in grade 6 or 7, where our teachers started to ask us to read a lot of articles about Western culture and American history, even though it was a risk for them in the education system. And they would do it very subtly, but they started push that just to make sure that the kids are not drifted towards radical ideas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. So you'd say that the kind of the hardcore propaganda machine was turned on and revved up after 1979. That's when they really were starting to, but it wasn't necessarily working. And then even up to the 90s, when you were young in school, it was still, it was the 9/11 event that,
Transform.
well, I guess, yeah, it kind of transformed it.
Yeah. So right up to, I would say, the breaking point, 9/11,
Yeah,
actually created a social faction of the Islamists called reformist Islamists. You often hear from the Democratic Party or the Liberals of Canada or the Labour of UK that we are trying to talk to the moderates of the Iranian regime or the leaders of the Iranian society. These are the reformers. Nine
yeah,
eleven and the consequences of that terrorized them, and also morally, like they all asked, like there was 5,000 innocent people died, like what happened? Nothing happened, and more
yeah,
millions, both from all sides,
yeah,
Americans, Israelis, Iraqis, all died. Nothing was
yeah,
happened, and animosity grew, and we are locked into these cycles of violence. So that faction arose, and that faction surprisingly had some reasonably social capital in schools, in mosques, in libraries. They held vast bodies of library study session or talk sessions in libraries across Iran. And they, contrary to what was obviously projected at the hardline regime voice and the mouthpiece of the regime, there was a lot of um, social exchanges and initiatives. But to your point, accurately observed or mentioned, right up to the 90s, that machinery of hatred was very much
mm,
in place and powerful. Um, Maybe I should depict it with a couple of examples to kind of um, uh, describe the 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 depth of it. So when I was in grade 2 or 3, my mom would say, "If you go to school, never mention that we are playing card games." Card games was, you play cards,
yeah,
you would have been punished by law at that early age if your family would have lost you as a child, because they were a moral decadence for the upbringing of a Muslim child. That's how the law looked at it, even for basic.
really,
Yeah. Or the hijab laws were ruthlessly enforced to the point that women would have to cover the entire body. But right, coming out of the 90s, a lot of women started to push back, and so the pushing back of women just by resistance in their dress code created a lot of other openings, both in the school system but also culture sphere, in music, in theater, in poetry, in literature, newspapers. It just reopened a lot of opportunities, in that civic breathing space took place.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and then I would also add that Iran, due to its length of it, so bit of a history here. Iran wasn't colonized the way that other nations were colonized. So Iraq is a nation that was part of the Ottoman Empire. Saudi Arabia was part of Ottoman Empire. All of North Africa. These nations didn't develop their own identity. Their linguistics and literature and a field of self-understanding in their social relationship. Iran, for the vast territory it has today, is about 100 million. A century ago was about 30 million, 20 million roughly. Uh, those identity and social fabric mostly remained intact and became a overall positive net post-revolution. Basically, that and social net kept the social fabric and social values very much intact and alive. and became a bedrock for resistance to the totalitarian regime that came out of the 1979 revolution.
Hmm.
So contrary to like in Iraq, there's a lot of minorities. I mean, we saw it. ISIS took over and started mass selling, taking over the like the Yazidi community, a very small minority, started selling girls and children into sex slavery. But the hardline Islamists came to power in Iran. They couldn't do that, even though we had a lot of minorities. They had Christian minorities, Jewish minorities. They couldn't just en mass rounding up like non-Muslims and sell them into, even though that's Islamic precepts. That's why ISIS was doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, those trickle down values that were at the civic level became a kind of a resistant bedrock that influenced my generation. So we kind of grew up almost to some level, even nostalgically, understanding our parents' experience in the previous monarchy, even though it definitely was better than what we have today. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, in terms of yeah, I think that kind of encapsulates a bit of a response to your question.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate that. Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot there that we definitely were not taught in school, even today. That's for sure. At least maybe I wasn't paying attention. That's very possible as well. But I know when we were getting to know each other, you had mentioned how seriously you took your Muslim faith for a period of time in your life prior to converting to Christianity. Um, you had used some terms I had not heard before in regards to your responsibilities and things like that. Could you touch on where you were at in your Muslim faith, how
Absolutely.
seriously you took it?
Yeah, so like I said, having grown up in the Shia country with the dictation of government and not much of a social contradiction to at least our moderate faith,
Hmm.
at the social level, not the political level, I was I took it very seriously, and I was a practicing Muslim. I performed the five times a day prayer. I performed Ramadan, the fasting month of Ramadan. And I was always obviously way more zealous and would go above and beyond in terms of fasting, contributing, doing my own charitable givings, and working at donation centers, and so was very serious in those regards. And um, uh, I guess kind of dissecting that a tiny bit better, more for you. My personal beliefs had and this is I guess I shouldn't say even personal. This is a if you are a observant and adherent of Shiite Islam, you would go to the nth degree to make sure your fasting, your prayer is fully upheld. And so repercussion for missing any one day of fast or even a prayer is a recovery by a performance of another multitude of days equivalent to those fasting or prayer. So that's the level of
Yeah.
religiosity I had. But I should have a clarification here because I wasn't an outwardly Muslim, meaning that I wasn't performing by wearing the garbs, the Islamic garbs, or like the outfits and the
Yeah.
um, all the other dress codes that kind of comes with the uh, orthodoxy of Islam. Um, I also wasn't what's called a militant Islamist, and no for my part. So, a fun story from my childhood is when I was right around the age of teenage years, where especially the government agencies inside schools start recruiting teenagers to for IRGC or Basij forces, which is a militia, social militia force. Um, they're very young when they get recruited to it. So my mom was like, if I ever hear you have even gone close to any of these offices in your school, you will be sleeping for the rest of your life out in the street, and you will not be living being let inside my house. So she kind
Yeah.
of drew the line, and that kind of depicts in the Iranian families and the mindset, because they were fully aware of what's going on in the government, and they don't want their children to join the atrocities the government commits, but either abroad or internally, right?
Hmm.
Which now years later have come to the fore. The whole world, although I'm not even sure if
Yeah.
the whole world now sees it properly for what it is, but like October 7 was the result of decades of brainwashing of a lot of hardliners. Um,
Hmm.
Many of the other bombings that's taken place is a result of the same thing, like just brainwashing a lot of kids. So Iranian families for many decades have been resisting that, and my mom was part of that basically social fabric. She kind of resisted that. So to give you clarity on that, I never joined any kind of hard like an Islamist militant hardline organization, but I was an
Yeah.
observant, fasting. I had Jewish friends and Christian friends. My
Hmm.
mom had a lot of Christian friends. My grandpa was an farmer, and prior to the revolution, he was a car dealer, and he traded a lot with his Jewish friends. Very close, very fond memories. He never talked bad about them in family circles. Actually, mom was very adamant that we respect them with in-depth dignity
That's good.
and love. So yeah, so that's how I practice Islam, and that all started to shift when my family. So we had a president. His name was Ahmadinejad. He was the beginning of all of the mess that Iran had. He went to the United
Mm.
Nations for the first time, and openly he said we have to eradicate this nation state of Israel. And all the international sanctions started to pour in on Iran, and that was when my mom said, "Okay." I was 15, and my mom said, "No, I'm not. I cannot keep you here. I have to send. The minute war breaks out, you get recruited to war, and you're going to be fighting for a regime that is monstrous." And
Mm.
so she decided to send me abroad for the rest of my high school, and we can go into the rest of it later on. But yeah, that's basically what happened.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I'd like to know. So the way that you were raised, and take me into the mind of Mehrshad when you're in junior high. So from the sounds of it, your father would treat people from other religions very respectfully, and that's how you were raised. So when you had a Christian friend or Jewish friend or Muslim friend, you didn't view your Muslim friend as better than the others, or maybe just a little bit, or it was very just even across the board.
Religiously, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. From an Islamic perspective, every Muslim
Yeah.
believes that the codified Sharia law is the last and the true revelation of God. That's what I was taught.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
when I was a child, when I was a 13, 14, 15-year-old child,
Hmm.
that was my belief because that's what I was taught. That didn't result in necessarily lack of friendship or denigration. In Iran, we would play street soccer with our friends. We had Christian, some Armenian kids, and I think a couple of Jewish friends at times. They played along us. I don't recall being hateful towards them or excluding them or anything. Um, yeah, but the theologically
Yeah.
belief that uh, my religion is the true religion. I was there.
Hmm.
I really want to be careful with what I say because again, obviously, I'm a practicing faith believer. So I was a sinner, so I could have definitely sinned towards my fellow human beings. I probably
Yeah.
did, right? The reality
Yeah.
is that I did. So, but was it hostile? Taking away the balls, the soccer ball, kicking them out of team, um, going falsely witnessing against them in their homework. No, I didn't do any of that, and I don't recall any of that in our classrooms. And teachers even didn't promote any of that. No, at least we had so in Iran the way that the government operated for brainwashing and Islamicization, they had only one or two specific programs. They couldn't control everyone because a lot of social voices were opposing the government for a long time, but they had religious studies and what um, civic defense studies. These two streams were heavily controlled by, like, there's two courses basically controlled by government, and that's where they would propagate significant
Mm.
amount of hatred towards Israelis and
Mm.
towards Americans. And then after that, it would be a general Western history under the guise of colonialism.
Hmm.
Um, but the rest, for example, literature studies, I don't, if anything, I remember in my literature teacher, Persian literature, to continuously encourage us to go to a synagogue or to a church, Armenian church, and learn about their paintings, One of my perceptions was that Christians light up a candle for worship, like it's part of a sacred process of worship. So later
Yeah.
on, this kind of we can come back to, but later on when I left Iran and went to Malaysia and Russia, every time I wanted to go to a church to learn more about Christianity, I would go and light up, bring a candle to this church, and people would look at me, I was like, "Why are you bringing
Really?
candle?" But yeah,
That's
I was
funny.
just like a perception I had, and probably a bunch of movies and kind of misunderstanding as a young kid that obviously was there. But yeah, so
That's
no,
only
there,
for
yeah,
church services. That's only for
yes,
Holy Night church
yeah.
services.
Now I know.
Christmas church services.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. So then, yeah, take me from your stops. I guess maybe briefly go through your stops from Iran to where you've ended up in Canada, and maybe if there was anything that really stood out, things that you learned along the way that were maybe breaking some of the propaganda that you were taught, some of the brainwashing you might have received throughout that process.
So first I went to Russia. And the reason quickly for that was at the time when I was leaving Iran, the foreign policy of Iran had come really cracking down, like crashing down, and the visa process for most Iranians had become really hard. So one of the colleges that my mom found was in Russia, and she found that the visa process is very quick because I would have been then losing the time frame to get recruited to the military as a young man. So she sent me to
Mm.
Russia. Russia was good and bad. You know better than I do, so this is something that Westerners are way more trained to kind of understand. So Russia has gone through de-Christianization, so it's the worst country to actually want to understand Christianity. It's not. It's they've departed from their Christian roots significantly because of the Soviet Union. Um, and the Orthodox Church is not socially active there. So I was very curious in Russia, and I did went to one or two churches, but in churches for visitors there are basically mostly like visitors are just told like be quiet, sit down, just watch their paintings and the architecture, and then have a good day. So it's not like a evangelical posture. That was my
Yeah.
first outside of Iran encounter with a non-Islamic institution of faith. That curiosity stayed with me because online I was doing a lot of research. Long story short, Russia didn't work out. The agency that had sent me there was a bit of a fraud agency. The educational transfer and transition wasn't doable, basically. So
Hmm.
I was planned to be sent to Malaysia to a. That's where my story with Canada starts, to a Canadian international school. And
Oh,
yeah, so my family Canadian international school, which credentially everything kind of worked out, and we got there, and obviously we had no at that point we hadn't had as much of an encounter and understanding of Canadian culture or history. All that Iranians know about Iran, about Canada, is moose and snow right up to your neck. Again, false perceptions, but that's
yeah.
it's
Oh
kind of a
yeah. You
two
forgot
way.
igloos. You forgot igloos.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally, that's literally what
Yeah.
people think. But yeah, there was a um, yeah, this school that we kind of came across, and my family sent me there and signed me up, and there um, all of my interactions started. Obviously, Canadian history courses that I was taking heavily engaged with multi faith elements that generated a lot of interest in me, and
Hmm.
simultaneously the freedoms I had in Malaysia. My mom continuously over the phone, she's like, Mersha, you should find a church and go to church, and you should find a synagogue, or you should see if there's any um, uh, the basically pantheistic Asian religions, and go and learn about them. She would obviously
Oh,
remind me
interesting.
not to necessarily convert, but to understand them and learn them and make friends with them, but not necessarily convert. And so that was
Why do you think she encouraged that? That's interesting to me because obviously, if she doesn't want you to convert, that's one thing. But if you're encouraging your child to go check out other religions, um,
you would expect
you,
eventually might
you would
have
expect
influence.
there's a risk. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yeah.
Did she? Was there? Where do you think that came from for her?
I think as a mother, exposed to the rhetoric of the time that she was
Yeah.
seeing, the Islamic revolution coming out of the 9/11 became more radicalized. because
Mm.
there was like the Americans came back to Middle East, to Afghanistan and then Iraq. So the Iranian regime started to become more radicalized. They started to dehumanize the Jews and Christians and Westerners way more. And she was caught in that rhetoric of society, and she's just, and many other Iranians, they were like, no, this is nothing to do with the country we are, the heritage we
Mm.
have. We've had thousands of years of Jewish presence. It's in the Old Testament. We know it. In New Year's, we read it. So I'm
Yeah.
not going to let that happen to my child. At least that's her
Yeah.
mindset. And many other families, same thing. I mean, I wasn't alone in that. A lot of other families advocated for their kids. In a way, it was kind of a rejection and a resistance to the rhetoric that was instituted at
Yeah.
the government level, that we all have to hate the state of Israel and the Jewish people. That we
Mm.
all have, and which then obviously, if you have that mindset, then it ripples down to your social behavior. You start
Yeah.
having a negative view towards fellow Jewish Iranians or Jewish Lebanese or Jewish Americans, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just becomes a globally like view and a lens or a formula that Iranians would have, and so that's why she was like she was pushing against that, and she also wanted, yeah, I think more than anything else, she just wanted me to have a opportunity to be learning and understanding and not necessarily
Mm.
engage in a risk. Or I think the second element, I was, and kind of she had a correct observation, I was very curious and I was very active socially. She also didn't want me to have the risk of falling into radicalism and extremism. Um, 2008 is when I was in Malaysia. 2008 is also the year where the Arab Spring and the Green Movement, for those who would be a bit older and remember those two movements in the Middle East, that took out multiple different governments. It was the beginning of the civil war in Syria. Millions died. Gas bombs were used by Bashar al Assad. So those scenes were horrifying to a lot of young people. Some became more hardened and became, as you can hear them even in mainstream media now, they are the ones who went on to believe that the United States is the source of all evil and is fomenting constantly 24/7 some kind of, and I believe me, there are so many academics that make that point. Um,
Mm.
but for the rest of us, we don't believe, we can see that, like, that was the result, the fruit of my mom's work was, that's
Yeah.
just not true. We are seeing
Yeah.
it. It's not true. It's not the Americans. It's not the Jews. It's not the.
Yeah,
um,
that's exactly it. It's like you have constant propaganda being pushed onto societies, whether it's Americans, Canadians, folks in
Iranians. Yeah.
Israel, where Iranians, and the reality is we're constantly told to hate the people in that country,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
country it is, but it's generally the regimes or the
Yeah.
the
The
government
fomenting.
that
Yeah.
that holds the responsibility.
Yeah.
And the harder they pound it into your head, the harder it is to differentiate between the Americans and the American government, or
Mm-hmm.
the Israelis and the Israeli government, or Iranians, Iranian government, right? So I
Yeah.
yeah, that's interesting, because personally, I would look at many of the what I would call atrocities that took place during the Iraq War and Afghanistan War by the Americans, and I'd say, yeah, there's an argument to be made there that there's some very bad people in control of a very powerful military.
Yeah.
But you
But
can
not
really
all of
point to
them.
almost
Not
no,
all of them.
exactly,
So many
no,
honorable people that served
yeah,
phenomenally, and
yeah,
that's not the entirety of the American service. I mean,
yeah,
frankly speaking, again, my training right now as a political scientist, you can't even have that structurally. If all of your military is entirely corrupt, you won't have a democracy. United States is a functioning
yeah,
democracy, and although I know a lot of people are gonna scream and yell that that might not be the case, but that is the case. That so, anyways, I think, going back to your question that you asked, my mom was responding to the climate at the time, and she wanted
mhm,
a very understanding, a bridging of the conversation and the dialogue, and the reality of people that are might be on the other side. Even though she was still an observing, good faith, observing Muslim, and she wanted to preserve that. Now, just to depict a kind of a even deeper revelation about my even mom or my family values. My mom at that time wasn't wearing hijab. If way back in the 90s she removed her hijab.
Oh,
My yeah, she strongly and adamantly fought back against my sister's hijab. She, in fact, when she was growing, my sister growing up, my sister would get enrolled, so she would get. I really don't want this to be a miscommunication, because the context of it would make a lot of sense. But she would get haircut like a boy, like a man
hmm
haircut, a boy haircut,
hmm
and get enrolled in boy classes in
hmm.
karate. And the reason for that was the revolutionaries came to Iran. All together, they sanctioned any girls' program, sports, activities. So their social opportunities
Wow.
collapsed. And my mom was
Yeah.
like, no way in hell. We never had a revolution or intend to support that revolution to eradicate all of our opportunities, education, school. I'm going to
Yeah.
still fight this and create that for my daughter. And so my sister, for up to the age of 8 or 9, she was in the same karate class that I was. And
Wow.
yeah, every time we were on the way to karate, my mom would turn around and say, Mersha, don't say anything. You have a brother.
Wow.
Don't, yeah, yeah, I'm not even exaggerating. And that, again, she wasn't alone. Like, she wasn't the inventor of it. Many people were
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
this. Many, because their social opportunities were reduced. But
Hmm.
that's the identity that is kind of missing. You We were asking, like, what are the perceptions? Like, those are the millions, arguably, that had to live good faith, peaceful Muslims, but they also
Hmm.
were disagreeing with so much repression and censorship and removal of opportunities for women and the hatred that was going on. So they had to navigate this life and live this tension and be a good person, try to do the best, obviously, but also
Hmm.
simultaneously, they believed in God, and the only religion that they were familiar with was Islam, and so they kind of held on
Yeah.
to that and faithfully tried to observe it in the most humane way possible.
Yeah. Interesting. Where's your father in all this? Was he
Mm,
like did he hold a similar opinion as your mother on these topics?
yeah, my dad and um, my mom was my dad, and my dad was my dad and my mom. So he was very laid back and hands off for our upbringing.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
mom, and then it's not too far from envisioning a Iranian family, because moms are left with their kids, so they instill significant amount of value to their kids,
Okay.
and dads are working. Social structure right up to about 10 years ago was a hard expectation from men to work, to be outside of house, to provide, and to be the protector of the family. And but the good thing is that they were in conflict. So so it's like the things I remember from my dad was just the manly things. Like, he would take me to soccer games. He would take me to um, hiking. Actually, I loved hiking when I was a very young kid. Loved hiking, and he would take me hiking.
Hmm.
And but he wasn't as value wise. He wasn't as involved or had the time to kind of engage in that. He would come home. He was tired. He would
Yeah.
rest. I remember he would teach me some extracurricular curriculum courses, like extra language. Like, he taught me, he started teaching me English as a second language. But it was mainly my mom that was preeminently engaged in the social and cultural training of us at home, both my sister and I. And yeah,
Okay. Okay, that connects the dots, and that was pretty standard at the time. That the
very
man would be out of
standard.
the
Yeah,
house,
just
and
man
yeah.
is out the house. And you would find a lot of fathers too that are way more engaged than my father at home as well. They would be the alpha fathers. Like, you come home, you get with the kids, sit down and do their homework before supper.
Okay.
Then you put them to bed. And so my dad wasn't necessarily as much hands on. um and yeah, I didn't find that he wasn't, it doesn't mean that he wasn't entirely hands-on. He was just not as much culturally. And for example, religiously, it was mostly my mom and my grandma that instilled significant amount of religious theology in us
Oh,
than
interesting.
my dad. But then my dad and my grandpa took us to farms and outdoor activity. My grandpa put me to a lot of work on our farm, significant amount of hard work. Yeah, ton of significant work. One of my richest experience from my grandpa was This moment I have, we were working in heat of summer, scorching sun, um, and we were collecting haze, and I was in the back of the tractor driving the tractor, and we had a lot of workers. They were all lifting up these massive bales. These are all manual, right? And my grandpa looks at me, and I was only about 13 years or so, 12, 13, potentially even younger. I can't remember exactly. But he says, Mersha, get off the tractor. You're no different than the workers. Get to the field. You have to work. And the initial grandson response was, I was so full of resentment. I was like, I'm your grandson. How could you possibly say
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
And but it didn't take me long to learn that, because I had so much respect for my grandpa, so much love for my grandpa, as is the case for a lot of Iranian families. Like grandpa and grandma are kind of out of like, it's kind of a bubble that is around them, so you don't question anything they present to you.
Hmm.
And so grandpa was phenomenal. That value that you have to humble yourself. You have to be at the level of everyone else. You don't get to elevate yourself. And he probably broke that pride bubble as a very young teenager for me, and I'm so grateful for that. And that's one instance in my life where I'm so, many of it probably alongside of many other values that he instilled.
Cool. That's good. Well, it does sound for the many hardships and challenges that Iran poses to society, or the importance of the family value. The family value
Yes, yeah,
is still there. That's nice. That's something
absolutely.
I feel is has been slipping in the West for a long time, and we're seeing the consequences of that today.
Consequences of that, yeah.
So,
That,
can you give me a year by year from the year that you arrived in Russia all the way to the year that you arrived in Canada, just to get a timeline?
year I left in Iran was 2008.
Okay.
I was in Russia for about, actually I can give you exact date. September I left 2008 Iran to Russia, and from September to '08 to about March '09 I was in Russia, and turned out that I couldn't continue with the degree or the education stream I had there. Then I
Yeah.
went to Malaysia, and there from '09 to '11 I was in Malaysia and finished my grade 11. And obviously had my life in Malaysia. And I loved Malaysia. Malaysia was beautiful. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, um,
Hmm.
Chinese community, very vibrant Chinese community there. And then from there, I came to Canada for grade 12, end of 2011. And in
Mhm.
Canada, obviously, the rest was history. And yeah, we can kind of go
Okay.
through it. Yeah.
And then, so in 2011, when you arrived, you're still Muslim, strong Muslim, or would you say your faith
No,
is
no,
starting
strong, no,
to? Yeah.
strong Muslim. Like in Malaysia, I would stay up. I would do my fasts, and I would go 4 a.m. to McDonald's to get a food before the fasting starts. So three
Oh
o'clock
yeah.
before college. Yeah, very,
Yeah.
in fact, very hard, very hardcore in terms of rituals of Islam, not in terms of like just outwardliness. So people couldn't even tell and I still had a bit of a secular life. Like my friends would go to bar for music and for connection. I would go with them. I wouldn't drink, but I would go with them. My classmates organized a coastal trip in Malaysia. I joined them, and um, I ended up becoming the sober guy that drove them around, took care of them. One couple of them went through a really bad like experiences, and I was the one who was taking care of them. And so, yeah, I was more or less on the side of very much practicing. And then same thing in Canada. In Canada, everything became even more exciting in terms of the tensions that started to surface and experiences I had. I don't know if you want me to kind of go into it, yes, but I can kind
Yeah.
of dissect
You
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love to. I'd love to hear that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically arriving in Canada, um, I was put with a Canadian family as a homestay family. So these are programs very popular in Canada. Canadian families adopt a international kid from anywhere. It's very common with Korean families. Um, and Chinese families, a lot of Korean families, and Taiwanese families actually send their kids to Canada at a very young age to avoid military service in Taiwan. And Iranians were early kind of like entry to this program too, but not as common because multiple reasons. But I was put into that program, stayed with the Canadian family, and this Canadian family, my second Canadian family, was a Christian family, an evangelical family, very, very kind and very respectful. And the I think the tensions that started to arise was um, they were outwardly living, like they weren't. How do I explain it to you? I'll be very frank here. You know how people introduce themselves? I'm a Catholic, but I'm not practicing. So if they're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
practicing, there's nothing that comes up to intention in terms of questions or challenges. But
Yeah.
this was a Protestant family, and they believed in Trinity. They believed in faith, the Scripture. They read the Scripture. They prayed, and I was mesmerized. Okay, my first response here, I'll give you a earliest moment of revelation for me. When I landed in Canada, my Canadian family picked me up and took me to a McDonald's. I was hungry. Took me to a McDonald's. Once the food arrived, they said, "Okay, let's hold hands and pray together." And they looked at me and said, "Don't worry. If you don't believe in what we believe, you don't need to say the prayers we say. Whatever you believe as prayer, you are free to say that prayer." And I was shocked. I was like, because in Russia, Christianity is dead, right? And the
Yeah.
perception from Hollywood about North, especially America, the land of freedom, right, is
Yeah.
Christianity is dead. We've killed Christianity 100 years ago. This is non-existing. And I look at this Canadian family and I go, "What? You guys Christians? Like you pray?" And they
Sorry,
go,
sorry to interrupt you. So your perception of North America coming from Iran was that Christianity was largely dead?
largely that, yeah, that's the mainstream
Interesting.
teaching, yeah. And so, if anything, Muslim countries present the real Christianity that is still alive is either Rome, in Catholic Rome, like in Italy,
Catholicism. Yeah.
or orthodoxies that are scattered across the Middle East. And one
Mm.
of the reasons they do that, I don't know if we need to necessarily go into it, but basically it's very much a ritualistic observation. So they look at North Americans as living this. The Hollywood is, let me just simplify it. The Hollywood is the lens through which a
Oh,
lot
of
of
course.
Muslims understand the
Yeah.
West and America.
Of
And
course.
for
Yeah.
me, obviously, that was turned upside down too. I studied political science and I was like, what are you talking about? Like 70% of Americans are practicing Protestants, and at
Hmm.
least 30-40% of Canadians are practicing Protestants. And the foundations of the countries are fully Protestants, not even proportionally. But so, anyway, so that was my first encounter.
Hmm.
And I was very much taken aback. So I do remember like sitting in the car driving back to the first Canadian home I had. Aside of many other wonderings I had, is like, why are the buildings built out of wood? Why are the streets so wide? Aside of many wonderings I had, one stood out to me is like, wow, the church is very alive. Like these people are praying and they believe in it and they do, like, and they said all the prayers. So it's not some kind of dead culture. And I started asking right away, it's like, so you guys are Christians, the church is alive. What are the churches? What kind of denomination or what kind of systems and cult? I called them cult back then. I didn't understand the differentiation between denomination. What kind of
That's funny.
cult brand are they from? And
Yeah.
I'm sure they probably took offense on that as well. But I just was trying to find out what their denominations were, and they described it all
Yeah.
to me. And eventually, all those conversations, we would have dinner conversations every night. They were practicing, so they would and they were the one who were even pushing in these questions. I would be right away the second, third night. I was like, "So you guys are practicing? Do you believe that Christ is the Son of God too? Like the good old argument of Christianity that we know that was in ancient
Yeah.
Christianity?" And they said, "Yeah, of course, that's the foundation." And I was like, is it practices still to this day in Canada? You have the church believes in Christ. You don't think it's like historical manipulation of the text? No, 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 absolutely. We have justification for that. I was like, bring me the books. I'm so excited to see what's going on with this. And I would
Oh,
challenge them,
that's
are you
cool.
not afraid of eternal damnation for making a claim that God can be a human being? And they would explain that. And they were shocked, right?
Yeah.
I would humbly share this. My first family was a Protestant. And when they were looking at my application, they were a tiny bit concerned if they can accommodate Muslims is staying with them, because they knew I'm gonna be praying, I'm gonna be upholding Islamic like norms in my, at least in my room, to respect like
Hmm.
the ritualism, the prayer time, the thou shall not eat pork rule for Muslims, and they were considering rejecting my case because they were not sure if they can accommodate it. But fast forward, they were surprised how much conversation and dialogue was taking place, and I mean, way down the road, the rest became history because I become so interested that I started going to a church and I started asking questions in the church, and I would come home and tell them how much questions I had, and they were like, "This is kind of crazy," and they got scared because I was being drifted towards Christianity, and so anyway, so very much a lot of unfolding that came out of that. Yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
That's cool. So then, what was it that was finally the kicker that took you from your Muslim faith to Christian faith?
With that was a journey. There was a
Yeah.
lot of, so early in my journey in Canada, I had the opportunity to get my hands on a lot of books and sources, and YouTube was becoming slowly a thing to see all these like tutorials and confessions and stories and documentaries. So I did a lot of research. The for initial phase was I had to verify that the New Testament text is authoritative and unchanged,
Yeah.
and it's not the result of evolution or a glorified language to reference to Christ as the Son of God. So like some kind of a elevated status that they wanted to give him, but really they just meant it for, calling him a prophet, but they just called him a Son of God to say you are so elevated. Um,
Hmm.
so I kind of went through that history, and this is past, like I finished my grade 12 with this family and moved on. Obviously, my church that was in Calgary, when I was a Muslim, that first person from that first church, um, I'm happy to share his name. Is a beautiful man. His name is Dave, and he became my best man in my wedding. Um,
Oh, nice.
yeah, he became best man with my wedding, and that 10 years, 15 years after that. But he was one of the first church members as a young part of the men's group that invited me out, and in a meaningful way started to kind of evangelize to me. And yeah, and then after that, fast forward, I came to U of A. I got into molecular genetics, which was my long-term passion and my dream. Within a month, I realized I don't want to get into it. Again, long story short, I was more interested in history and human relationship than genetics. It turned out when I was in university, I realized I don't want to work in a lab. So switched to
Yeah.
political science, and that's where I studied philosophy. Philosophy exposed me to Western history, the origin of the formation of a lot of these big topic talks like human rights and constitutional balance and human dignity, and all of that were started to be covered. And to my absolute disbelief, all of a sudden, half of these authors are Christians, practicing Christians, and so it just ripped me to shred that. Um, that these practicing Christians were the origin and the founding authors of these books, great books that we always were told that these are secular authors. They were practicing Christians. And so that really challenged me. And parallel to that, the campus would bring in a lot of power to, so for example, power to change, or I think Anniversary invited back then. Ravi Zachariah Foundation sent a couple of figures to our campus. I had a lot of lectures regarding Christianity's history, authenticity of text, and so once it was a kind of a slow evolution. And I went to a lot of churches, tried a lot of churches, um, and first I kind of verified that text is truth and truthful and honest, hasn't been changed. Then by 2013 and 14, I started 2012, 2 years into my degree. Then I started dissecting the theology. So like, if this is the Son of God, how can I verify this? If the lamb, if the blood of the lamb, which is the blood of Christ, is supposed to cover our sin, how could the physical blood of a human being 2000 years ago cover my sins today, when for obviously both from a rabbinic and a Islamic point of view,
Hmm.
um blood needs to be shed in the moment to cover you. You have to actually sacrifice a lamb from an Islamic point of view to cover your sins.
Mm.
And I had a lot of tension and talk with multiple different pastors, and I think I kind of phased out of Islam. This is where I kind of phased out of Islam, not entirely. I didn't abandon creationism, thanks to um, a very strong set of Christian apologists that defended creationism strongly at a very top level, at the academic level. So it was undeniable. It's called the design argument. I'm sure you've heard of it, the design argument. It's
Design
unescapable.
argument, no.
Yeah, it's in the field of sciences and biology. Design argument is basically it's irreducibility of design. So the watchmaker, when you come across a watchmaker, whenever you come across a watch, you know that there's a watchmaker. Watch is so
Yeah, yeah.
complex in its design, it's irreducible to randomness. The watch doesn't randomly land on the ground. You know, there's a watchmaker that made it and then dropped it there for whatever reason.
Hmm.
So same thing goes with creation. Creation is so complex and it's intertwined laws, coordinating and collaborating laws of creation, that it implies a designer. So the argument becomes inescapable, forces you to accept a degree of creationism. So I kind of phased out of Islam, but landed into this mishmash position of agnosticism, belief with creationism, with complete question about all religions. I investigated Judaism. So surprisingly, Judaism doesn't have much of a difference from Islam. It's the same thing. It's almost like there's multi prophets in Judaism. There's
Hmm.
multi prophets in Islam too. Same laws
Hmm.
with a couple of differences. And Christianity was in 2014. I started reading a New Testament text in Farsi, and the commands of Christ started to really hit me. So when when he was talking about love your neighbor and go above your go pray for your enemy. Now, as he
Hmm.
investigated the origin of justice, eye for an eye always causes the replication and circulation of injustice. That was constant tension with what Christ teaches: and forgive your enemy and pray for them. So it was very attractive after I came to this kind of stage of agnosticism to Christ, with this kind of like a arm's length attitude towards any other religious body and beliefs. And eventually one night, I mean, I don't know how much more time we have. I could a bit dissect it even more. The dreams that I
Go
had.
for it.
Yeah.
I could go. Yeah, I can honestly, Mershad, I can do this into two parts
Yeah,
if need be.
that's
So
that's good. Yeah, usually I end up self shortening it for a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of witnesses and public talks I've given, but the
yeah.
reality of it is once I landed into this agnostic place, bit of a more inquiring attitude, I started getting a lot of dreams. But they
Interesting.
weren't necessarily like they were divine dreams, but they weren't about Christianity. They were mostly about life. So I dreamed when my grandpa passed away. I had that dream happening to me earlier before my grandpa passed away. Or one very explicit example was I had a trip to Vancouver throughout my second year. I was part of a dance club. One night, I just 3 nights before the departure, I dreamed that I'm stuck on the side of the road with the battery dead, complete battery dead, and it was dead of a night in highways of BC, and I had no help. So I woke up, I panicked. I was like, "What if the car is actually?" So like the battery's broken. Took it to a battery store, and the guy put up the hood and checked the battery and says, "How did you make it here? The battery's completely dead. Like there's nothing in it." And it was taken aback. I was like, these dreams are meaning something. I've never believed that dreams can actually speak to human beings. And
Yeah.
that's when I started to associate. It's like there's no human being that is putting these dreams in my head. It's God. It must be a divine source that because it's projecting on future. Um,
Hmm.
I had another terrifying dream that was very much prophetic. Basically, dreamed that three people in a car on a highway, high speed, got into an accident, died in Iran with an explicit, knowledge of the highway and location and everything. Woke up early in the morning, called my mom back in Iran. Hey, mom, how's it going? Are you guys have you gotten into an accident? No. Are you okay? Yeah, we're all good. I just dreamed that three guys were in the car, high speed, in a highway, got into an accident in Iran. I'm just a bit baffled. I don't understand what's happening. I hope you guys are safe. Be careful when you go out. Yeah, yeah, nothing has happened. Are you sure you're not hiding anything from your family? It's okay, Grandpa's. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hung up the phone, and then later in the day around noon, she calls me back and she goes, Mersha, you said three people in a car. I'm like, yeah. It's the brothers-in-law of my sister-in-law's husband. Exactly three people in a car in highway. They got into an accident and the car blew up. Just
Wow.
like the step by step what you described to me. I just found out because I had called my sister to see how she's doing, and she was crying and she was telling me that her husband was going through this grieving, and I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified. I was like, both my mom was shocked. I was like, this is crazy. Like you're getting these dreams, and we both associated it with God because there was many other dreams that kind of came, and some of them actually saved us, just like the battery story. Really, really saved us from way more complicated issues.
Yeah.
And so now fast forward back to the kind of the stream of my faith journey. That's by 2014 and 15, I was hitting a dead end from my answers, and obviously secular philosophy wasn't answering anything really in terms of meaningful and strength of the foundation of belief. And so for many years I had studied Christianity, and I was like, okay, so if Christ is so beautiful, what an amazing person. It's like, even if he's a prophet, he stands well above Muhammad. Muhammad killed his opponents, he conquered, he had so many wars in his life. Whereas Christ, according to the text, he didn't have war, he didn't pick up a sword. He actually told his follower the minute they cut his ear,
Yeah.
drop your sword, for my kingdom is not come with the sword, but with the word of God.
The
Uh,
word. Yeah.
yeah, and so I was absolutely drawn to Christ, and yet I couldn't accept his claim to personhood of God. Couldn't accept his claim for his blood covering the sins of even future sinners, and the fear of blasphemy. Like when you obviously at the Mount Sinai, God says to Moses, "Do not make anything else in my image and worship him." So this was the most terrifying thing. It was like, I'm a creationist. I know there was an encounter with Moses. And if this is sin, then I have rendered my entire eternal life to burning fire and eternal damnation. Um, and so one night I was very depressed, and depression has actually kicked in a bit earlier than that too. I had postponed a bunch of exams and became very suicidal and very depressed. And this night I had the Bible, just opened it up, read a bunch of New Testament, and then closed it and started crying. And late at midnight, it was just banging my head on the pillow and crying. And I started basically almost yelling in my room. It's like, God, if you're alive, this text is so rich and fulfilling, but I cannot believe in it because the foundation of these claims, all of them, all of these denominations claim that you cannot accept Christ as a prophet. The claim is he's the Son of God. He pre-existed. He came and he died, and he's the one who takes away the sins. Like everything that for a definitionally a person of God, he's making a claim about. And you have to show me, I will accept it. My questions have come to an end. I no longer can question him, but you have to reveal it to me. So I fell asleep. Nothing happened that night, obviously, but about a week or two ago, it was just a short while after that, still started to go back to school. And one night I just go to bed normally, with all of these questions and these journeys hovering in my head, very heavily weighing on my shoulder as well. And I just get a dream that very divine, very vivid, very out of body experience. So in this dream, I just wake up very openly, like a real flesh life experience. I
Mm.
wake up, I sit in my room. My room is completely dark, complete dead of the darkness of night. Nothing is visible, and there comes a glimmer of light right through this darkness, and then the shining, radiating, the corporeal body of Christ just appears through the darkness in my room. And
Wow.
next to him, both on his shoulders, there were two entities, angelic light radiating entities, in the shape of a cloud. There was no face, there was no figure, there was no body to them, just cloud shaped figures. And they were full of radiation that was so heavy, thick heaviness that were just, imagine yourself under the depth of the water where your chest is pressed and you're low in oxygen after about 30 seconds, and your
Hmm.
corporal body just get weighted down, except that there was like 100 times worse than that in that dream. And one of these clouds or angelic entities had an arm, and the arm started to point out to Christ. Um, and in the dream, I knew, obviously, I completely was fully cognitively aware that this is the person of Christ. Um, and he was smiling at me. He had um, had a very humble posture, just smiled at me, stood there for a period of probably 5, 8 seconds, and I was shaking, terrified, and jumped out of sleep. Now, usually people ask
Hmm.
me when I share this, they say, "Do you remember his face?" I'm like, it's not like I remember like how much beard he has or what kind of nose
Yeah.
he had, or I saw a man, a humble, um, um, antiquity looking man, that his facial features wasn't necessarily visible to me. What it was the person of Christ was visible to me.
Mm.
His garment, his outlook, his looks, his body was very much signified the person of Christ. It wasn't any other prophet. It wasn't Moses. It wasn't Elijah. It wasn't Muhammad. It was Messiah. In my head, actually, the concept of Messiah, it was like, this is the Messiah. That's how I actually perceived it in that dream. I woke up terrified. Terrified about 3 a.m. school nights. Crying for like an hour, hour and a half in my bed
Wow.
from horror, from like just the fear you have from after accidents, major accidents, and you're almost like shaking and your hands are cold, your muscles are not moving. Same exact features. Pick up the phone, call Iran, tell my mom, Mom, I just had a dream, and obviously it's the day during the day back in Iran as it's night in Canada. So I called them. She answers the phone. So she listens to the whole story and she goes, maybe actually you've been telling me all these dreams, so maybe Prophet Messiah is trying to answer one of your prayers. And I remember she's like, she called him a Prophet Messiah, and I still, in my head, even though I had been going through all this journey and questioning, I still
Yeah.
associated to Prophet Messiah, like I considered him a prophet. But I was opened because something I don't share commonly is the dream was composed of three entities, the two angels and Christ at the center, and that symbolized eternity to me, very much. So after that dream,
Interesting.
very much torn to pieces about eternity, and that was my number one question, obviously, about Christianity. So fast forward after that, I studied intensely, considering prayer and talking to Christ, and I think I may have even shared with a friend or two. And about a 2 weeks later, time after that, I had my second dream. Second dream was my mom appeared in this dream. She was praying for me from far away, far, far away. And all of a sudden, her figure was replaced by the person of Virgin Mary. And
Hmm.
this time, Virgin Mary's prayers were coming to me, and they were hitting me like waterfall, weighing down on my shoulders, hitting my body, um, with a lot of pressure, like as if you are standing under the waterfall, real waterfall in life.
Hmm.
And yeah, I obviously it was covered in the prayer, and then I woke up, and again, same tears and terror and uh, joyful terror, not necessarily a war terror, but just a terror in my heart that I've encountered God, like I've encountered something divine that is in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Um, And obviously, again, a second claim, fundamental claim of Christianity, that Christ was born of a virgin, Virgin Mary. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember explicitly the person of Virgin Mary was very much visible and very much critical to this dream, that second dream.
And that was important to you. Understanding that was important to you at that time.
Very much virgin birth of
Yeah.
Christ. How could a mother, so the miraculous life of Christ and the birth of Christ, and the fact that Christ is of God, is of the essence, that whole the antiquities claim that Christ is of God, the Father of God. And yeah, and then after the second one, I wasn't convinced, but I was very much willing to reach out to Christian friends and ask them to intentionally pray. I shared the dreams so far to them. I said something huge is happening. I don't know what it is. I am still hesitant to reference Christ as the Son of God. It's blasphemous. But this is happening, and it's, I know for a fact, a divine encounter. I can't deny it. And fast forward, it's about 2 to 3 times again, 2 to 3
Weeks.
weeks away from the third dream. I had the final dream where I was at a home back in Iran, my grandparents' home. My grandpa by then was dead in real life. So in this dream, my grandpa shows up at the door. I open the door. Grandpa comes into my grandparents' home, comes in. My grandma was already in the house, sitting around a table, wearing a black garment and very sad, very, very sad. Grandpa comes around. Grandpa looks super young, super, super young and shining for some reason, just radiating light. He comes around, puts his hand around my grandma, calms her down, and then he grabs my hand, like literally grabs my hand and takes me to a room, closes the door, turns around, and he has this thick of a book in his hand, turns around and gives it to me. And I look down, look at the book. I go to touch it. I can't touch it. It's just hovering in the air. I lift up my head to look at my grandpa and ask him questions. He's gone, completely gone, and everything around me is gone. It's white, absolute whiteness. Nothing is there. I'm no longer at the house. I'm just at this cloud covered, white, absolute white place. And I look at the book is still hovering in the air. I can't touch it. I can't do anything to it. I'm just shaken by it. And there's a ray of light that opens up on the book from above, and the cover starts opening up, and then there is a vastly amazing, beautiful trumpet, like just like Revelation, Book of Revelation. A trumpet goes off, right? But a trumpet goes off to start speaking, almost like a divine voice to start saying loud, "Read in the from now on. Read in the name of the Father and of the Son." And then the third term was Holy Spirit that was spoken. And then when it was spoken, just like a rushing water, it went right through me and it woke me up, yelling
Hmm.
it. Yeah, so I woke up yelling, not Father, Son. I just woke up yelling, Holy Spirit. The last word that was spoken to me went through me and
Yeah.
was shouted off as I woke up with an absolute terror. Like I just woke up from, again, late at night. And
Yeah.
at that point, I was still a student with a house full of 7 roommates scattered across 3 floors, upstairs, main floor, down basement, off
Yeah.
of close to the University of Alberta. And I was yelling 4 a.m. School nights, yelling 4 a.m. Holy Spirit, and then crying. And once I finished saying Holy Spirit, I out loud said it in my room. It was early in the morning. Christ, you are the Son of God. I've seen it. The text is true. I'm gonna read it, and follow it for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And then, so I spent almost all of that morning just shed, like just cry a tear that I've never had. Obviously, I've never cried like that. Even when my grandpa passed away, I didn't cry that way. But it just was an unstoppable crying that was happening in my room early in the morning, and I said it verbally because I had studied the scripture full to know what it means to come to Christ. So I said, I accept the Son of God as the Son of God and the atoning lamb who justifies the sins and has taken away the sins of humanity. And I kept looking for more verses to see if there's anything missing out. I have to still say, I mean, again, my understanding was still naive to what conversion really means. I probably didn't
Yeah.
understand that I was fully converted, like Christ has encapsulated my heart, and I
Yeah.
was His. But And so yeah, so I went to bed and woke up the next day, and yeah, I was a Christian, I guess, in my head. And right away, it was towards the end of spring, beginning of spring, sorry, beginning of spring. So I mass texted at least 15 friends, Christian friends that I have. I was like, is there any Bible studies going on? I'd love to join one of those Bible studies. I had the wildest, craziest like dreams. I have to join and start practicing this faith because it's my salvation. I was worried about my salvation. So, and to your surprise, nothing was going on. Nothing. I could not get, and the rest of it is a whole, again, God's journey, how He brought me in through, um, to join a group, to small study, a Bible study group, and then yeah, the Lord opened up a lot of different doors, and yeah, the rest I just tried to
Wow.
live my faith. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
praise
that
God.
part
That
was
is
a tiny bit
fantastic.
more stretched out.
No,
That's
no, that's
usually,
fantastic. That's a
but
beautiful
this is
story.
basically one of the ways that I can actually tell the full story as opposed to chunk it out and say it in part, which then takes
Yeah.
it out of its context and how God was radiantly
Yeah.
walking me through the whole stages of faith and obedience, and was challenging me when I wasn't necessarily even knowing Him or accepting Him. He
Yeah.
was challenging me and talking to me.
I have a question for you, Mashad. So you had
Absolutely.
mentioned that early on through that process that you were experiencing depression, even suicidal thoughts. As you were going through your dreams and going through that process, was it was the depression, was it subsiding, or was it still there at the same level throughout that process?
It
All the
was
way to your
less.
conversion.
It was lessened because right up to my conversion, I was going to two or three different church services, especially as a young adult. One of the big ones that was very influential and heartwarming for me was the project at the assembly. The Back then it was called Pentecostal Assembly. They've changed the name to a different church
Yeah.
right now. I can't
In
remember you.
Edmonton here,
Yeah,
Millwoods
yeah,
Pen.
yeah. Melville's Pen. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very popular young adult ministry that they had for quite the longest time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so their worship was I remember every time I experienced depression, I would mark it in my calendar. Sunday, even it would take me about 2 hours to bus there from campus to
Mhm.
Millwoods. There was no LRT back then, so just campus and catch the bus to bus to bus to get to that location. But I would be willing to go, and throughout the sermon and the worship, my soul would be just out of my body, and to some
Hmm.
extent, maybe would even kind of launch me back into my sadness by the end of it, because I would struggle with the questions like, this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
so real and so heartfelt. Every time there's verses, they're speaking as if the God Himself is speaking, knowing what I'm struggling in my heart.
Hmm.
And yet, accepting this means I have to accept Christ as the Son of God. I don't know what to do. Like, this
Yeah.
is so
Yeah.
living and so refreshing to my soul. But once I accept it, I might be gone for the rest of my eternal life. And
Yeah.
so it was a constant. It was reduced for sure. It gave me a lot of hope for living, and it was a couple of my Christian friends were very influential and key to kind of redirect me to the period that was depressed. They asked me to defer my exams and try to get some rests and kind of take care of myself. And I was very grateful for that. Absolutely grateful for that.
I find it interesting that on the cusp of conversion, the thought of taking your own life was there just prior to that. It is for me. It just screams a desperate move by the enemy,
Yeah, yeah,
knowing what's right around the corner. Oh, that's
hmm,
amazing. Oh, praise God. Thank you so much for
yeah,
sharing that.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
so then you're Christian. How does your family take it? How does the first phone call, like, how does that go?
So yeah, first phone call, because up to that last dream, it was always Prophet Messiah, and I wasn't living Christianity. After that call, after that dream, the calls
Yeah.
became, He's the Son of God. Mom, you have no salvation. You have to jump in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the conversion and evangelism started, and that's where things started to go sideways. Um, yeah. I have to be humble and express the multiple conflicting paradigms. So my mom was graceful. Number one thing she didn't do, that was the biggest, most painful fear I had, was rejection of me. She didn't reject me, and she respected. She was loving. She was respectful and thoughtful and supportive. She was like, Mersha, we suffer from so much religious repression back home. People are not free to choose their religions. I want to give that to you. I bless you. I love you. The second point she made is that, Mersha, be abnormally careful how you uphold this religion, how you publicize it. It can cost the life of your sister, your mom, your aunties,
Mhm.
uncle, everyone, without
Yeah.
a doubt. So you have to, you're responsible. Which put so much, I actually, because of this, I didn't get baptized until 2018. So this was 2015. By
Okay.
2018, I got baptized. Whereas I wanted the next day to get baptized. So I didn't get baptized for 3 years. Um, so those two, and then the more I got discipled into observance of the text, um, my mom started to notice it. So we would be talking about family affairs, and my mom obviously operates from a Islamic view and Islamic value. And if neighbors or friends or strangers walking down the street did something wrong to her, and she's telling me a story, her way of treating that is Islamic way, and I am like, Mom, pray for your enemy, pray for them, forgive them, love them. And those were the tensions. And then she would be going, was like, how dare you? Like, you're telling me to pray for someone who looked like in a lustful way towards me, when I like, or
Interesting.
like, yeah, like try to steal my purse when you know your sister and I are barely making ends meet and can barely even pay the bills. You're asking me to pray for a thief. How dare you? Like, are you trying to mock me or something? And no, and she wouldn't necessarily present it that way, but the tension, because she would be told that she's wrong in her ill wish that she was extending to that robber or a neighbor that was done doing something wrong to her, or and I would be the advocating for reconciliation or love for
Hmm.
your enemies and pray for them and forgive them. And she started noticing that all of that was becoming a sense of tension, and it kind of cooled our relationship. I was very close to my mom. As you remember, going back to my childhood, my mom was very close to me. She raised us up. My dad wasn't as much close to us, but my mom was super close to me, and especially kind of like even an extra grace and love for me, because she had sent me away from family and didn't have any kind of supervision over me. And so I do want to quickly, I know you were going to edit this. If you need a break, if I've gone too long for talking, by all means, I'm happy to. You're
No,
good?
not at all. I'm just I'm telling my wife here to turn the music. Can you hear the music at all in the
Not at
background?
all. No, no, no. I just realized, well, all of a sudden, I was like, I've been talking for a long time, so I want to make sure he's rested and he's not tired or he's.
No, no. I am rested. I she's blaring "He is Mighty to Save"
Mm.
song with my daughters, which is great.
Yeah, that is.
But
It's kind of no. I'm not, but I can't even hear it.
okay, well,
So yeah,
if you okay, perfect. Well, then that means the noise cancellation's working well. So if you
yeah,
do hear any background noise at all, just let me know.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
uh, but yeah, no, continue. So
Oh,
your where we left off there was
yeah, the
talking to your
tension with my
mom and the
family, yeah,
contrast between how to deal with the
the
situation through
values,
an
yeah,
Islamic lens or a Christian lens.
absolutely, yeah, and so that's kind of cooled our relationship. We kind of started to depart, and I started to digest the hard food for myself. It's like, okay, if I am to live my for Christ, and even the text says you have to abandon your family for Christ and the cause of Christ, and so I have to prep
Yeah,
myself, and I started talking to some friends and the church leaders, and it's like, this is happening. I'm so alone. The only thing I have in this earth is my family. If I lose them, I'm completely done. There's nothing else I have done. And so for 2 years I was grappling with that, and I kind of prepped myself, because the more the tension and the heat builds up, the more that potential of rupture could kind of come between us. And
yeah,
importantly, also, they saw it as endangering their lives. So this is legitimately a risk, like a security safety risk for them. That any kind of breath I took now, because I had become this advocate and this Christian out in a free society, would put them at risk. And fast forward, my mom came to Canada for the first time. She got a visiting visa and came to visit me. After 6 or 7 years, she was able to come and visit me. And in that visit, long story short, I had some Christian friends that were very heavily engaged in prayer and small groups, and they invited her over, and we did a lot of prayers together with her. And in one of those prayers was Holy Spirit prayer night, and she had visions. She multiple times had visions that she was very much caught off guard and was surprised that she had these vivid visions and meaningful visions, by the way.
Hmm.
And long story short, she had her own journey and she started being spoken to. And she eventually, she stayed for 2 months in Canada. By the end of her stay, she came to verbally, literally recognize Christ as the Son of God. And
Wow.
then was good, but then she went back even more scared. And um, but the tensions subsided again by the grace of God. The tensions subsided because I started to live my faith a bit more and openly talk to her and encourage her to live up to the values of the New Testament.
Hmm.
And even well, recently has been really hard. The conflict, the war in Iran has been very much eroding that kind of like progress she was making in the discipleship that she had. But yeah,
Why,
the
why do you think that is?
Oh,
Why do you
just
think
the
that's
lack
eroding
of
it?
the fear. Just so many people have been killed. So many
Oh,
people have
okay.
been killed. So many innocent, precious human beings have been killed around her. She's seen the bloodbath. She is alone. She doesn't have a church. She doesn't have fellowship. She's not fit for Islam anymore, and she doesn't have. She can't go to Muslim fellow friends and say, "Hey, my heart is broken. Let's pray together." And she doesn't have a Christian community, and she can't approach the Armenian Christians because the intelligence services continuously monitor the Armenian community for conversion. Anyone they convert, they get arrested and they go to jail. So she can't approach them, and she's scared of doing satellite or video chat connection to small groups, underground churches, either inside Iran or outside Iran.
Wow.
And on top of that, the economic condition is just havoc. Absolutely, they've had to escape. For the past 10 years, they've been on the run. Basically, they've got like bottles of water, boxes of medicine, 6 month worth of stock of food and emergency. And she herself has a lot of illnesses that need to be taken care of. So all of that has taken her away from the process of kind of being discipled or reading the scripture, being fearful. Probably she's fearful. She may not be even saying it to him, but she's fearful of opening the scripture in her phone because the government is now checking the phones. And so, and I've tried to kind of um, really come to a place of peace and love and surrender because I had to mitigate to what extent I want to talk about it because I didn't want to be pushy in a very
Hmm.
dire situation. And I'm
Hmm.
not there to be safely whispering and praying in the dead of night with them. And so I'm just praying distantly that she would find some solace, some peace at some place, maybe open up the New Testament versions that she may have had with her, read some scripture, and trust that the Holy Spirit and the Lord is going to minister to her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. That's a powerful image and something that I think a lot of Christians really need to think about is, I've seen multiple pastors really cheer on this war, specifically in the United States,
Hmm.
some kind of mega churches, if you will. And there's almost pray for Israel, but screw everybody else. Let prophecy
Hmm.
unfold, or no weapon forged against Israel will prosper. Let's rain hell on
Hmm.
country A, B, C, or D, right? And so many Christians get sucked into that, and it is heartbreaking for me. And your mom's story is a great example of how bad it can get, and even worse. There's many Christians who are even in a in a darker spot, in a more difficult position than your mother right now around the world. And we really don't. I went to some churches recently here, and it was pray for Israel, but they did not mention anyone
in
else that
Iran.
was, yeah, in Iran,
And
and
you'd be
it
surprised,
broke me.
very surprised, Luke. Iranians are not even as much anti-war. It's that they just want the similar support, um, in terms of one-sided support. So they would, like, most of the civic society in Iran is an against regime. They are even willing. I mean, my mom, I haven't heard her complaining about the war, because her hope is like, my life is gone. Let's have a future
Mm,
for these kids, the new
yeah,
generation, the global peace that can come after this.
yeah,
But unfortunately, like you said, there's only one angle to it, and the civilian support that I even think, again, in my studies, I would argue, even a hardline argue, that if you carry the war in a meaningful way where you have support for opposition and civilians, coming out of the war, you would potentially have a Marshall Plan, post Marshall Plan world where prosperity that was unleashed on near communist takeover of Eastern Western Europe would unleash in Iran. Like, it would be, it's the prime civic conditions and political viability for a post conflict if you attribute your attitude to beyond just the nuclear, because the nuclear problem, I mean, now we're kind of getting into the politics of it, but the nuclear
mhm,
problem is the consequence of hardline Islamism. So if you have a moderate civilian government in Iran, not only the nuclear, the world prosperity, because Iran is,
yeah.
and as
Very
Canadians, I
resource
share
rich.
this, very, very resource rich. Like,
Yeah,
Iran versus Canada, unfortunately, and I'm a proud Canadian. Obviously, I've been here for so long. I take pride and love Canada, and I actually hurt for Canada for some of the directions we take economically and politically. But Canada is rich water resource wise, and maybe a couple of minerals in Canada. But even then, it is still on competition with the resources that are available, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because good, healthy market competition, if Iran's prosperity would be properly unleashed to the global market, it means lower cost of living for the entire
hmm,
global economy. It
hmm,
means security for the amount of security dollars that Westerners have to pour into their port of entries because of state organized terrorism that comes out of Iran is beyond comprehension. It's beyond comprehension. So you go to the source of this problem. So it's not that the war necessarily, obviously, wars, by all my family, we said our goodbyes. Last war, not even this one. The last war, we've accepted this reality. I knew, my research 2 years ago talked about security dilemma locked in between Israel, United States, and Iran that is not going anywhere, and it's going to get intensified. And so I knew
yeah,
the conflict is going to come. So we had accepted these realities, but there is this genre of dialogue where either you have a very hard left lens of, let's be friends with the Islamists,
yeah,
or you have a hard right, uh, what you described, like an absolute no sword shall overcome against this nation state of Israel,
yeah,
which doesn't take into account a holistic analysis of how can we move to a world where America is not quagmired into a long, protracted conflict, but
yeah,
also these conflicts keep not coming back because you left a regime that is bloodthirsty for Jews and Christians and Muslims alike all around the world, right intact, or kind of give them oxygen again, and simultaneously be able to support all the civilians that, like 2 months ago, there was massive uprising. In 2 days, they killed 40,000 Iranians.
mm,
After they opened up the internet, almost uniformly all Iranians found out that at least one family member or extended friend or relative has been dead in their families. Like this, and Iran is a 100 million population. Like,
yeah,
the scale of that is unfathomable. And a lot of international lawyers, they actually think that if Iran collapses, the numbers may be sitting in the hundreds of thousands. Like, they may be sitting in an absolutely catastrophic level, because Iran orchestrated a systemic killing of its civilians.
So I'm glad you bring that up for how dark
Yeah,
the topic is, because you'll hear, I'll see it on both sides where it's, no, this is just Western propaganda to make the Iranian regime look bad. Um, and then you'll see, no, this is, tens of thousands, if not more, have been killed. And we're sitting here, me as a
yeah.
Canadian who's never stepped in a foot in Iran in my life, I don't really know what to believe, which is a big reason why I wanted you have you on today, not only to share your testimony, but I know you have family back home. And how often are you able to speak with them these days? Do you guys talk every week or?
So no, not every week. Barely. They sent a message on WhatsApp or one of these platforms, and they say we're alive, and they post their plan. We are escaping to the city, or we are going to take refuge. The new wave of attacks are coming. We're going to this city or that city. Whenever the message gets through, it gets through.
Yeah.
And then there are certain part of the day the government kind of barely opens up the telephone. So my mom literally calls and say, "Hey, Mehrshad,
Wow.
we are alive. You're good. I can't talk too long. Have a good day." That's
So
all
they,
she can do.
what would the governments, why would they do that? Why would they,
Um,
unless they're obviously trying to keep communication and narrative under control?
so if they continuously cause a absolute blackout,
Yeah.
international community might get continuously fed by rumors
Yeah. Yeah.
and lack because there is a vastly large diaspora population outside of Iran. The diaspora, if imagine if you cut them off from millions of their family
Yeah.
relatives,
Okay.
then if they
They
come
would,
under the
yeah.
precept that millions either are dead or have been orchestrated to be killed, it could perpetuate even a worse conditions for war and politics, right? So that they,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're crazy, but they know if they completely do a blackout like they did last 2 months ago, already they are semi-genocidal regime now labeled internationally. They can't escape that. It might foment even more international hardship against them. So that's why they
Hmm.
kind of open up so families can talk to each other to reduce resentment. Um, that's their logic. But obviously, if you're opening up for 10 seconds, or not 10 seconds, but they basically have gaps in throughout the day where like 3:45 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So, and the logic of that is people are driving home. So not as many people are on the phone. They can't call. They can't do this. So there's going to be only mothers at home who are going to talk to their kids. And so mothers can call back abroad and say, "Hey, I'm fine. Thank you for calling. I'm good. I'm going to the doctor," and then hang up. That's how they're kind of their political calculation goes into that, but that's why.
Yeah. Interesting. Hmm. So then, in your communications with your family, the the uprising that took place and the numbers that were being provided for the amount that have been killed, have was that topic discussed with your family? Is there, you feel there is accuracy in the severity that has been shared on, I guess you could say, on the left side, because the right side wants
Yeah,
to say that
it
it
was
was
in the thousands.
propaganda,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the numbers are more than verified, and if anything, we're actually, I I think they're severely underestimated.
Hmm.
There are multiple reasons why they're underestimated. Because, and I share this trying to be as neutral as I can, because I'm not necessarily anti-Israel in any form. I think some of the Israeli intervention can help, and they have
Hmm.
been helpful, in fact. Um, but I think in Israel has been penetrating the entire security apparatus of Iran many years, many. They started
Yeah.
it since the sanctions started to take off, and they kind of logically concluded that we can't deal with this regime by negotiation, and it was proven. Like the regime wasn't no in no form or shape was conceding to any negotiation.
Yeah.
Um, and so they kind of penetrated, and everyone knew. Anyone who is even on the pro-Israeli side, they knew they were going to support riots and rebellion against the regime. But that what that means is the regime forces are all taught. These are Israeli agents. They're trained. Shoot to kill. Do not have
Hmm.
hesitation. Mass killing. Shut down all the entries of the cities. Roll in all the heavy artillery and just gun civilians down because there's like 9 out of 10 is Israeli. That's crazy. They're not, the Israelis are not like that. There's not as many. There's probably one
Yeah.
out of 2,000 that's been trained and has penetrated. But obviously, if you're a totalitarian regime and you're existentially in a place of we're gonna be wiped out like the Nazis, then you
Yeah.
operate in that logic. And so
Yeah.
and also there's other verifications. So there was a lot of grave sites where the government massive trucks of like cooling trucks that would bring in dead bodies throughout the day. They would start informing the public to show up at so and so location at 8 a.m. They would finish up at like 8 11 p.m. And like every 10 to 15 minutes there was a new truck, and they would roll out all the dead bodies on the ground. Then they would take off, the next truck would come, roll out all the bodies, and they would ask the public to just come identify them. And some of the videos that snuck out of Iran, they showed the skill and the intensity and frequency of these trucks showing up. And then a lot of independent journalists started to map all these cities and locations with the government. And what had gotten through was indicated about 30 to 40,000. But we
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, we Iranians have lived just like Soviet Union. I would quickly say, like Soviet Union, Chernobyl. I was watching a documentary. Chernobyl happened in Soviet Union. To this day, the official numbers of Chernobyl is 30 people dead. When you hear that as a robust, neutral, intellectual, and scientific academic
Yeah.
individual,
Yeah. You know that
is
it's far, far
fabrication.
greater than that. Yeah.
Far, far greater. For any
Yeah.
scientific, any physicist knows that is significantly, grotesquely underrepresented. It's
Yeah.
basically the state sanctioned all the numbers. But the 30 is what has gotten through so explicitly. The Soviets couldn't sanction it anymore. It was just the explicit numbers that was. So the 30,000, the regime said about 5,000. The opposition independent outlets said 30 to 40,000, but they repeatedly verify is like this is what has gotten through. So if the regime collapses, if you start getting your hands on to the military sites with documents of grave sites and locations and coolant storages and houses where they keep all these bodies, you would sit in the hundreds of thousands. And it's guaranteed because the population of Iran. And so one of the reasons they make that argument, I'll tell you why. Iran and its demographic is sparse and it's very ethnically based. In Iran, we have some religious region that are like the Rome of Muslim world. They are they are like the Bible Belt of Islam. They never rise up against the government, but they're very small. So one of the cities is called Qom. It's the home place of the founding Ayatollah, the Khomeini of the 1979. It's his
Okay.
hometown. It's a
Yeah.
small village. Oh, it's not his home. It's a small town, 2 million population. That
Did you say
city,
2 million?
yeah, 2 million is
Oh
the small
yes.
city of Iran. Yeah,
Yeah. That's funny.
yeah, that's basically twice as
Canadian, you're
over.
like, that's a massive city. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In Iran is very small. It's like
Yeah.
Tehran is about 18 million with the surrounding.
Wow.
But that city, Qom, had massive uprising, and the resentment was so horrendously bad that they were burning down mosques. Like this is French Revolution style, absolute hatred social level. Most of social and political scientists are looking at it as like this regime is gone. Their
Yeah.
heartland, their Bible Belt is turned against them. The hometown of Khomeini, which people, so in Khomeini's hometown, people wear burqa. You know, like if you're kind of confused, how's that significant? Burqa was sanctioned about a century ago in Iran, right? Like
Yep.
burqa, you know what burqa is, the full cover,
Yep.
like even your eyes covered. So it's a very, very orthodox interpretation of Islam that not even all Muslims wear, because Muslims kind of cover their hair and
Yeah.
expose their. But if you wear burqa, it's a very religious, very, very religious religiosity signature, which implies that you're observantly following everything that the religious hardline Islam tells you to do, which was
Hmm.
that city. So we saw massive uprising with massive burning of multiple mosques, which are considered in those holy cities extraordinary holy. So political scientists were like, if we are told 40,000, this is sitting in the couple of hundred thousands, and the
Mm.
regime managed to shut down hundreds of thousands of deaths,
Yeah.
even in the smaller cities that never would usually rise up. And like if you are a village, self-sustaining village in the borders of mountains of Iran, you raise your cattle, your sheep, your water is coming down through the stream, what like rivers, and you're self-sustaining. You're very primitive living. Like the villages, small scattered villages, operate still in a very humble way of life. But there was uprising in the small villages, and we had videos of them. People would that didn't even have electricity in the villages. They would take the videos. They would come to the city, find an opening in internet, transmit it to opposition media outside to show that even in small villages had risen up. And
Wow.
yeah, so the numbers are, unfortunately, because of the left right now, and it's the craziness of the liberal left or illiberal left. It actually has become harder to verify the actual numbers that are in the thousands. So in contrast, we had like the Syrian civil war, which killed hundreds of thousands of people. And now, because of the culture of the left, we are not able to identify one of the most grave human killings that have happened in the Middle East
Yeah.
that would articulate our foreign policy in terms of engagement. And if anything, they would have probably, and that would explain to you, like, if there was opening in that culture, that would mean social satisfaction, justification. We would come behind Trump and or the conservative or at anyone who was advocating a military approach to resolving the Iran's nuclear situation, which is what obviously the left doesn't want to see in the public. But not
Mm.
wanting to see it in the public has resulted in one of the most dangerous precedents of censorship and manipulation of data to properly study the atrocities that were created by the regime. And then, literally 2 months later, they are trying to push the and put pressure on the staff and administration to go negotiate with them. And somehow expect that that negotiation is going to yield long term, like as if the Iranian regime is going to kind of obey and honor international treaty. They're not honoring international treaties by closing Strait of Hormuz, attacking Muslim Gulf nations,
Hmm.
Muslim Gulf
Oh
nations.
yeah. I know. Yeah.
So Dubai was the first and the only center of bypassing international finance for the Iranian regime. Iran has been bombing Dubai and Emirat. It's like, yeah. Anyway, so we can get into it if you wanted to. However extent you want me, I can kind of expand it more clearly from a kind of an internal
So
perspective.
just to kind of summarize, you have so Israel, the state of Israel realizes they're not going to be able to negotiate with
Hmm.
Iran. So over decades, they organized a color revolution essentially,
Absolutely, yes. That was a
and
decade and
then
a half ago. I
and
was a teenager. I was supporting that movement.
yeah, okay, and
And that was a
then
reformist move. That was hoping to work its
yeah,
way through basically a Nelson Mandela type, like a Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. All of that was ripped to shred. It was just brutalized.
okay, and then you have a boiling point, and the regime's answer was a shoot first, ask questions later
Mhm.
response, and that was their only, and that speaks of desperation in my opinion. When you that's kind of
Absolutely.
your last resort.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a. So, what came out of that 2 months of killing was top notch generals of the IRGC leak their own, or sometimes other people would leak their voice of
Yeah.
complaining about the orchestrated mass killing, and at times referencing themselves and worrying that they're going to now be compared to the Nazis, and how it's over, like they've committed an atrocity where they cannot be justifying it in the international regime. Even the Chinese gonna put pressure on, but like it's crazy. Like some of the Iranian officials were worried that the Chinese are not willing to kind of come behind them because the level of atrocity was so bad that Chinese are running the Uyghur concentration camps. Like the Chinese regime would be hesitant to kind of come behind the Iranian regime. That's kind of crazy coming out of the mouth of top-notch like orthodox officials of the regime of Iran.
Yeah.
Their voices leaked out to the media, and some of their so. Not only that, it just like you said, the desperation when you have top-ranking regimes kind of their voices are kind of leaking out like that. It shows that a lot of people around them are so concerned the
Yeah.
structure is collapsing. They're willing to leak and break the fabric of the regime and escape the country. And yeah, so that's, I think, yeah, that's basically what you described in terms of
Okay.
collapse of the structure. Yeah.
So just briefly, when you were growing up throughout your earlier years in school there in Iran,
Hmm.
you were what were you taught about Israel? Like they were
Um,
the enemy, or what?
uh, the friend.
Okay.
So no, it's Iran is very funny. Right up to 1979,
Yeah.
Israel ran cultural centers in Iran. Like that's how close Iran and United States, sorry, Iran and Israel were. Very close,
Yeah.
very, very close ties. Again, an obvious number one reason, largest Jewish population in the entire Middle East outside of Israel is in Iran.
Hmm.
Period. It's a hard stop. After the revolution, hundreds of them, thousands of them migrated to Israel, United States, Canada, Australia, France, Britain. That was number one. So Iran was very close to Israel. There's also a bit of a cultural element, historicity kind of embedded into the fabric of that relationship. As I kind of early on, I mentioned Iran was moved away from Sunnism. That also came with Arabism. So Arabs, Iranians define themselves as non-Arabs. And so
Okay.
obviously the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The old logic kind of applies here. So Iranian foreign policy was very much lenient and accepting of the birth of Israel, aside of the fact that there was some really moral grounds on it. So I actually remember I wrote it down to bring it to this interview. I'm sure your audience and yourself may have heard from the famous Schindler's List movie, where
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the most famous Nazi members saved thousands of Jews in Nazi Germany. One of the Schindlers, or not Schindler, but one of the Schindlers of history was an Iranian. The Iranian consular officer in France saved 2,300 French Jews that were about to be rounded up and sent over um, to hands of the occupying Nazi forces. They actually a famous movie even in Iran about it, where these Jews were brought into the Iranian consular. They were given makeups. They made more look alike to Iranians. They were given hijabs. They were trafficked to Iran to be saved. So that was Iran before the Islamic Revolution. The hardliners came to power. Um, Early on, the way the rhetoric worked was, we are not against Jews. We just don't like the state of Israel. We love the Jews. There's nothing wrong with the Jews. Sadly, when you introduce extremism, you don't have a control over how much it's gonna go.
Yeah.
So the two first year, they were trying to put up their chests and say, "Oh, we're just against the colonization of Israel." But they obviously, because the regime was closed, so dialogue and debate and correction wasn't there. So that rhetoric evolved and became, no, we are against the Jews too. Within five to
Hmm.
10 years, it evolved
Yeah.
and it became it became a full blown systemic, to the point that right up, I think 20 years ago, they installed one of the most largest um, publicly visible clocks. This is one of the most disgusting things. People have attacked this clock so many times and the regime installs it again. It's called the ending time of Israel. It's clocking, and they
Hmm.
have like dates. They give a date and a countdown to this destruction of Israel.
Interesting.
It's one of the most iconic squares. Like it's the Times Square of Iran has this clock.
Wow.
It's the
Yeah.
ending. It's disgust, and civilians that would pass by it and throw tomato at it. They break the
Huh.
electrical wiring in riots. They would break down and set it on entirely on fire. They would put it up again and again and again and again.
Huh.
It's and that clock has become literally the devastating point of hostility between Iran and and Israel, because you're literally
Oh.
saying 10 million innocent civilians of Israel, which by the way historically they've been living there since the time of our own history. The Persian history shows they're living there, that they've been, we actually guided and protected them to go back to the land, right? Like the Persian monarch
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
biblical text celebrated,
Hmm.
lived there, and now you're counting down to their complete destruction and eradication. That's like a huge social tension kind of point embedded in the public square in Iran. Yeah. So yes,
Hmm.
complete hatred towards Israelis and Iran, United States, and quote unquote Western colonization, and typical argumentations of the left that has morphed and has grown bigger and bigger and bigger. Not at the social level, at the political level.
Hmm. Well, we'll start wrapping this up here, but I do have one last question for the
Absolutely.
time being. To be honest, after this conversation, I probably would have you back at some point. You're a
Yeah.
wealth of knowledge and a breath of fresh
I
air.
did want to kind of tap into it. Not right now. We can actually, if you felt like
No,
it,
no,
we can
no.
kind of come back to it
Go ahead.
and kind of dissect a tiny bit of really like what it really means to be a Christian and love
Oh yeah, for
Jewish
sure.
people and even love Muslims and even meaningfully love Israel without the propaganda that constantly kind of penetrates the conscience of people,
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
not theologize every foreign policy necessarily and just kind of keep that outside. I'd be very happy to
Yeah,
kind of dissect it,
yeah.
dissect that.
No, let's do that. We'll land on that. That's actually far more impactful and important than what I was going to ask. So let's do that.
No, 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 please. I mean, if you have any, yeah, final thoughts on
No,
that.
it just had to do with well, it had to do with the war, but specifically some of Trump's recent tweets, or I guess
Oh,
truths that he
yes,
was,
yes.
and how the Iranian public
Perceived
how
it.
they perceive that kind of stuff when it comes across. If you want to touch on
Um,
that quickly,
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
and then
yeah,
close
yeah.
with
You
yours, yeah,
wouldn't get
please.
this at all in the mainstream media. You with the
Hmm.
typical paid left of center individuals who go and represents the quote unquote they speak spokesperson for all the Browns or all the
Yeah.
oppressed or all the colonized. No, so I have to very quickly say I don't necessarily line up myself with the way that Trump uphold himself in the public, but his
Hmm.
behind his speech, his policy, a lot of his policies are actually phenomenal, and a lot of his policies actually have some problems, no doubt. So he's not perfect, he's not an angel. So the
Yeah.
last tweets that he put out, you're talking about the praise be to Allah tweets, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So um, from a political science view, and I think a lot of Iranians understand that, he's trying to actually chokehold the regime because he's actually trying to um, force them, corner them into agreeing to a nuclear program to stop the war. The
Hmm.
contrary to what the left is now rageful for, he's like trying to be, and he has it in his book too, his Art of the Deal. Sometimes you need to show some threats to be able to get what you need.
Hmm.
And Iranians understood it. Iranians didn't understand that he's trying to kill. And the reason the Iranians understand that is because for now 37 days, all of the aerial operation of United States and Israel has been fully focused on avoiding civilians and hitting all the military and combatant targets. And so they didn't take offense on it. It was the typical, the left and the hard right that was yelling and screaming at each other, and that how they took kind of offense on that. Um, I think the way that he actually was perceived, praise be to Allah phrase, was very much kind of magnified and reflected in the public. Even like some right wing commentators started to criticize that, which was kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Um, but the Iranian perception was more like you are coming along our civic resistance in pushing back against the Islamic hardlinism by saying praise be to Allah as a way of resisting, like as a way of, the left calls it um, framing. You reframed because praise be to Allah is an utterance that the radicals would say before they
Yeah.
commit atrocities and killings or terrorist attack. And so they saw it as a point of actually liberation. And obviously, a lot of civilians had it because of the aerial campaign for a long time, avoiding civilian targets.
Yeah.
And I know he said the civilization is going to end. No one, typical Trump, they didn't believe he's going to actually start carpet bombing all the cities with millions and millions of people. People knew that typical Trump is not going to obviously act that way. He's going to put threat and They did. I mean, there was an understanding he's going to take out some bridges, probably associated with transportation of military supplies and whatnot. And that was a hard pill, obviously, for at least the conversation circles that I was listening, especially with the independent media I was listening. A lot of Iranian students were talking about that, but
Mm.
I don't think they were looking at it as okay, he's taking it out because he hates the Iranian,
Yeah, yeah,
because they had looked at the 30 days of war. There was an evidence prior to it that look, he's going after all of IRGC bases, all of the head of the regime. He took out all of the top two levels, three levels ranking of the regime. So they're like, I think he's so. And the other thing is that both from an Israeli and the American side, they are almost in a shock in terms of how much popular support exists in Iran to kickstart the next regime towards a more friendly, peaceful, pro-Western
mm.
approach. They don't want to decimate that. So that what I'm understanding beyond the rhetoric, what comes out of what I study in Pentagon, CIA analysis is that they don't want to rip that. If you go like a full-blown Vietnam carpet bombing rice fields, rice farms, that
Yeah,
turns the civilians against you. You're gonna be the next 80 years fighting again another nation state that has produced so many civilian casualties, and they don't
yeah,
want to do that. They've learned from the 20th century. They're not doing that. They're doing a completely different campaign. It's not perfect. Again, like nothing in politics is perfect.
yeah.
More or less, I would conclude it in that lens, exactly opposite of what the hard left and right would present to you in the public.
So, are you familiar with the Greater Israel Project?
Yeah, it's not being implemented. It's a full lie.
Okay, you don't think that's being
Absolutely.
implemented?
I could have happily talked to you extensively, provide hard,
Oh,
undeniable evidence.
yeah,
And I would be happily debating in any campus or any media, but it's not being implemented.
interesting.
Um, I don't know, long term, like, I mean, I'm not a prophet.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
depending where the conflict is are the Israelis gonna be so pressured and cornered because of Hezbollah to be forced into occupying long term Lebanon? Is the Lebanese government going to agree to demilitarize the Hezbollah? Are they going to be successful in? But I know as of now, everything that has happened, it's a lively discussion, like from
Hmm.
the hard left, for hard right of the Israel policy. But you have to keep in mind the entirety of the political class in Israel knows the minute Israelis go for a greater Israel, actual, like practical, like a stage by stage implement, just like nation building when George Bush went to Iraq and started
Hmm.
implementing, they
Yeah,
risk probably like 200 Israeli embassies would be shut down around the world. They risk
yeah.
that. That's
So
a
it's yeah.
legitimate risk.
So it's not necessarily that they don't want to do it in theory. It's that
Yeah.
they don't see a
Well, as of now, I
logistical
don't even
way.
believe they want to do it. I
Okay.
strongly have hard evidence they have objectives.
Yeah.
End Hezbollah, regime change in Iran. These two goals are going to even deal with the Gaza problem. So Hamas's source of funding is going to evaporate into thin air. Hamas would
Hmm.
be destroyed. If you regime change in Iran, Hezbollah will be destroyed. The region would be prosperous. A good relationship is Israel would be recognized. So then Israelis don't even need to expand their wing to be able to protect themselves. So the whole greater Israel theory is you need a bit of a room to protect yourself against these invading armies all the time.
Hmm.
And so I don't believe the establishment is so because of course they are. I mean, the establishment Israeli policymakers are looking at the public opinion in the Western Hemisphere, especially the United States. Even if Europe completely goes, United States is phenomenally important for the Israeli foreign policy. So and already there's a lot of negative view in terms of back and forth in the heat and the fog of the war.
Hmm.
So I don't see any of their objectives to be intended to be implemented because here's my argument. Israel had the largest piece of land conquered from Egypt and they negotiated it back into the hands of Egyptian. And they've negotiated a lot of to get their peace. They want to live in their land peacefully. You let them live. They live peacefully. They are not looking for some kind of a massive, I don't know, European-sized country. They just want to live in their holy land is actually right along those boundaries, and they're kind of content with it. Um, so I don't see them implementing that. And I
Okay.
now, as of now, I think the way they think is, if we topple the Iranian regime for the next 50 years, our security is almost near guaranteed, and we're gonna be in way better safe posture with the Abraham Accord and friendly regimes, and a more like a balanced regional environment, that the greater Israel would risk tripling social support for pushing back against Israel.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, if you want to wrap up with kind of how you view Christians or your opinions on how Christians should be behaving, interacting, and treating, um, people of other faith in general, I guess. That
Hmm.
sounded like that's the direction you were wanting to go into.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, generally speaking, I think um, it's kind of tied into the greater conversation about our identity politics in North America. You don't need to have a simultaneous hatred when you disagree with something. You
Hmm.
can disagree and love. And in fact, Christ had a fundamental approach from that lens towards everyone, including his crucifiers. He loved them, and he fundamentally disagreed with their sinfulness, with the way that they were carrying out their unrighteousness. So I think simultaneously, there's a lot of, sadly, like a lot of Christians I hear that they want to check even some of the flawed policies of Israel, but they do so with anti-Semitism. That's not helpful. You don't need to be anti-Semitic to fellow Jewish people. You can critically and thoughtfully and reasonably and lovingly present um, your criticism of foreign policy without necessarily negating the dignity and the personhood, and uphold that Christ-like love.
Hmm.
Um, Simultaneously, if like I know the left is concerned with this social stigma, that's why they kind of ally themselves with anything that kind of presents a general criticism of the Muslims. So you can criticize the Islamic hardline or Islamism without having to have um, the view that you're actually imposing some kind of a negative evasion. If anything, actually, healthy criticism gives room and oxygen to healthy voices of Muslim world to actually approach you and interact and bring
Yeah.
them to the fore, as opposed to actually remaining silent. Because when you remain silent, the hardliners would come. And similarly, inside the church, my encouragement is we don't look at it at every single political policy from a theologized lens. So if you're trying to support or critique foreign policy of the United States, you don't need to theologize it. Like Christ told us to love your neighbor, you're not allowed to engage in like a defensive war in it, like in Iran. You can, right? Like it doesn't need to be theology, and vice versa. You don't need to
Yeah.
theologize Christians. Christian Zionism is a significant error-filled body of belief that essentializes return and land over Christ. Now, funny enough is that I'm a historically supportive state of Israel. I'm actually funny enough is that from our perspective from Middle East, Israel as an organic nation to the Middle East, even more so than Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire
Hmm.
was there 400 years. Israelis have been there for 2,000 years. So you can historically support and love the state of Israel, the importance it holds for its Jewish people. But as a Christian, you don't need to theologize it, because our theology has only one point and one point only, as my dreams actually depicted to me. Read in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Christ is the center, the consummation, and the final, last Alpha and the Omega of our faith.
Hmm.
And so we don't need an approach to every single policy from a theologized point of view, to which then it becomes sacred then to hold on to that view. Every view has a problem. It's not perfect. And yeah, so, and same thing as Canadians, like we have a bit of a Canadian context. We don't need to look at it. I honestly don't think we should be looking at the United States as a very evil approach to this war. Most of the prosperities we've had in the Western Hemisphere came from the fact that we were brave enough to dive into the battlefields, overcome the two of the most repressive systems of thinking, communism in Soviet Union and Nazism. And prosperity returned back to the continent of Europe with millions of people fed, living in dignity, even though they're not practicing Christians, but they're living in dignity, in personhood of the God that has envisioned for them. So sometimes conflicts, especially if they're held with reasonable degree of checks and balances, um, is not necessarily this. I know the moments in the moment there's a lot of death and there's a lot of misinformation or there's a lot of perspective conflict, but um, funny enough, a lot of Iranians are actually phenomenal amount of support of Iranian side is behind the war because they see and envision a future that would bring prosperity and reconciliation for the world and for the region, for Israel, for Iranians, 100 million Iranians. I mean, imagine there's Canada's
Yeah.
40 million, 100 million Iranians would be lifted out of poverty, and it would help the whole world and global community to be more stable. So it's not entire that policy that is he's engaged. If you kind of sift through the rhetoric of the left, anti-war left, there is a lot of potential hope for the future that can be reached. But sure, it is uncomfortable. It's not a comfortable option. War is
Yeah.
never a comfortable option. Not
No.
anyone's first choice.
Yeah. But they have quite a bit of social support from the Iranian people, in your opinion.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
even more so than
Interesting.
United States Republicans. Very much, it's
Yeah.
on. Even a lot of social scientists are kind of caught off guard that this level of social support exists, and they're explained in multiple different reasons. But yeah,
Interesting. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I can already
yeah,
tell that I will want to have you back. And now that I understand your breadth of knowledge, being able to focus in on some specific subjects moving forward would be great. But
absolutely, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I
And I'm sorry if
really
I went kind of took off in different
no.
branches, but for sure, I'm happy if you
That was
wanted to hone
my
down on certain topics.
no. That was my hope. No, that was great. I really wanted to pick your brain. You brought a perspective that honestly most people don't get to hear,
Mhm.
especially in North America. So that was the goal, and obviously sharing your testimony was very important to me, and I'm happy that you did that. I thank you for doing that. That's a very powerful
Yeah, yeah. Thank
testimony.
you as well to you.
Yeah, of course. And I just want to leave us with, anyone who is listening to this, make sure to be praying for those who are being affected by the war in Iran, the conflict in the Middle East. My heart goes out to your mother, Mehrshad, and everyone else who's in that situation. Um, but yeah, I think, and as Christians, we definitely need to push and really rely, maybe lean on the power of prayer for those that we can't, physically help. Maybe we spiritually can. So, yes, thank you so much again for your time, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, it was a
Thank,
pleasure. Thank you so
yeah,
much again. And
thank
yeah,
you
keep the underground church in prayer and all the people that are caught in the circumstances. And yeah, thanks
yeah,
for this opportunity to talk to you and kind of share my testimony and all the blessings to Christ for the work that he does for the church and many who do not know him. Prayer for the
for
kingdom
sure.
to come, really.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Mehrshad.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.